Following the loss of Republican candidate Herschel Walker in a contentious runoff election, Republican officials in Georgia, where the runoff was held, instead of trying to figure out what happened, what they did wrong, like, for example, allowing Herschel Walker to run in the first place as a Republican, are saying, you know what? Why don't we just end runoffs? Now that we lost. Oh, now the Washington Post actually reports that Georgia Secretary of State Raffensperger has come out in favor of changing the state's current runoff system, which requires the top two candidates to run again if nobody gets the majority of the vote. So now, look, the last runoff, super important. As a result of Raphael Warnock edging out Walker, Democrats have a slim majority in the Senate. Now, it could have been higher had Kyrsten Sinema not, been Kyrsten Sinema and left the Democratic Party. But still, they have a slim majority, and that does have certain benefits. Now, for Republicans, gigantic loss. And actually happens to be the third such runoff loss to have happened to them in the past 2 years. But I'm sure that has nothing to do with Brad Raffensperger suddenly saying, oh, runoffs maybe not be such a good idea after all. No. For that, let's look at the quick history of Georgia runoff elections. In the 10 Georgia runoffs held between 1992 and 2018, Republicans actually won 9 out of 10 races and actually improved their vote shares in 8 of those 10 races. Oh, interesting. Now, in 4 of them, Republicans overturned a deficit. The average shift over that span, about 5 points in favor of the GOP on the margin. Fascinating. So now, when they were having these wins, in these runoffs, did you hear Republicans talking about runoff bad? No, of course not. In fact, Raffensperger, who now has come out against runoffs, had his own runoff, where he actually increased his vote total. He went from a 0.4% edge on election day to a 3.8% clear win. So, interesting. Now, these runoffs, they look like for a while we're going pretty good for Georgia Republicans. Now, when it was going good for Georgia Republicans, did you hear Georgia Democrats complaining about the runoff system? I didn't. Maybe there's somebody out there saying something at some point. But generally, Georgia Democrats were like, oh, well, we lost a runoff. That sucks. All right. Now, what's interesting here is what we see from Republicans is that the only time Republicans want to, change the rules, and I'm sure you've noticed this pattern as well, is when they lose. Now, when they lose, they either sabotage the incoming administration by removing a lot of their powers. We saw that in Virginia. We had seen that in other states as well. Not the latest election, but one of the earlier elections before Glenn Youngkin. We've seen this in places like Michigan, where you had an incoming Democratic governor having their powers reduced or stripped by the losers. Now we call that? We call that a sore loser, and someone who's trying to sabotage the incoming administration. So, no, look, Democrats not only won 3 Senate runoffs held after 2020 and 2 elections, they actually improved their performances over the general elections in each of those races. They get about 3 points in each 2020 race and nearly 2 points in the 2022 runoff. In the former cases, they actually took fewer votes than Republicans on election day, but later won. Oh, interesting. Democrats also closed the gap in another 2020 runoff for the Georgia Public Service Commission by more than 2 points, although they actually ended up losing. So I give you the numbers because it points out that they're effectively 4 of the 5 best runoffs for Georgia Democrats in the last 30 years. And the 3 most consequential, all in the span of fewer than 24 months. So Republicans look at this and their head explodes. Their hair is on fire. Oh my God. Oh my God. This runoff system is not working for us anymore. And they cry. They are the world's worst sore losers. With Donald Trump being the obvious example of being the sorest loser in the world. No one is more butthurt at all times than former President Donald Trump. But he is an extension, by the way, the natural conclusion to all these Republican losers who cry or sabotage the next administration when they lose. They hate it. They hate when they lose. Look, everybody hates when they lose. Sure. But they don't do a post-mortem that actually, for their campaigns, that actually examines what they need to do to actually win. No. They find a way to cheat. They find a way to screw over someone else, to change the rules, to try to benefit themselves, or at least take away any alleged or supposed advantage that Democrats might gain from these rules. Now, that said, you could argue that, hey, look, what about the Electoral College? Democrats never complained about the Electoral College until Donald Trump. Not necessarily true. Progressives have never really liked the Electoral College. It's always been undemocratic, literally. And yes, progressives have always called this out. Now, think about it this way. Biden won the election thanks to the Electoral College, right? These Electoral College votes. And of course, he also won the popular vote. But the Electoral College is the way that you win elections. Now, I guarantee that if you ask a progressive, along with, I think, most liberals, would they still be in favor of getting rid of the Electoral College, even though Biden had won? Yes, I guarantee that that progressives and most liberals be like, yeah, it's still undemocratic and we should definitely get rid of it and actually have democracy. Because look, it's not about whether we win or lose. That's not the issue here. It's about actually what's most representative of people. Human beings. And look, the whole point of the Electoral College was to make small red states have more weight in elections than blue states with higher populations. The Senate also structured in a way that ensures states like Idaho, for example, have equal representation to states like California. They have equal power. They all get 2 senators, every state. So, look, the rules of this country have always pandered to rural conservatives because they cry when they don't get their way. And it's the reason that they don't get their way all the time is because they happen to be in the minority in this country. In fact, the whole purpose of the runoff elections also was to help conservatives originally. Got a load of this irony. The runoff elections actually originated as a Jim Crow era effort by white Georgians to dilute the political power of black Georgians, as the Washington Post's Matt Brown recently wrote. Fascinating. They were initially pushed by a segregationist state legislator who blamed his re-election loss on black voters. Because, of course. He then later admitted, no, the reason that we actually wanted the runoffs was because we want to suppress the black vote. We want to dilute it. We want to make sure black people are not represented. So no, that said, that's why I bring that up because it's important historical context. And why I actually might not disagree with the idea of changing the runoff rules. I know, again, I started this whole segment pointing out how Republicans are crybabies. And this is the reason that they want to do these changes. But some of the changes are actually not bad. So let me get to that. But before I do, let me just point out why Raffensperger says that he's in favor of this. He said the recommendation was motivated by the burden that the system places on election officials. Come on. Particularly after the GOP-controlled state legislature reduced the runoff period to 4 weeks after Election Day. Runoffs were previously held in January. That placed a runoff right in the middle of the holidays and condensed officials' work. Oh shoot! Did we accident reduce the amount of time? Where these candidates can actually campaign and make their case in these runoff elections, these very, very important runoff elections. Oh, did we just put that in the middle of the holiday? Oh, shoot. We should just get rid of it then. Lots of excuses. But look, I'm not totally against Raffensperger's idea to replace runoffs with something else. And so among the ideas floated are expanding early voting locations. Well, I like that. I like early voting. I like more early voting locations. Based. Hell yeah. Or adopting ranked choice voting. That's another good idea. Funny enough, speaking of runoffs, ranked choice would actually create an instant runoff, which isn't a bad idea. It's a good idea. I'm okay with that. Now, that said, of course, you have to be cautious when you're dealing with Republicans. They could do all sorts of, things. They could say they support all sorts of things. And then, when they get public support, they just kill the runoff and then just leave it as that. Not do any of these reforms that they were talking about. As the Post noted, changing the runoff rules would almost certainly be dead on arrival if Republicans were still overperforming in them. But it's far from certain that Democrats will continue to benefit from them as well. Again, I don't really care who benefits. I actually care about doing good voting reforms. I mean, think about it this way, right? Republicans have finally caught on to the idea of mail-in ballots being a good thing and early voting being a good thing. I actually welcome that. Not because I want more Republicans to be in office or have more Republicans to win. No, I don't. Look, again, it's immaterial. I just think anything that helps voters be able to vote is a good thing. I am on the side of more democracy, not less. So if we could take this better idea or some of these better ideas and implement them to make voting better and easier and more accessible, and yes, even have third parties to be more competitive when you have ranked choice voting without having this spoiler effect, that would be a fantastic thing. But as usual, you just have to be careful about who's saying what, supporting what, and whether or not you can actually trust them. Because remember, they only started supporting these ideas when things stopped going their way.